you for being here. Welcome to my talk. We'll be talking a little bit about BuildContext and all the surroundings that entails. And first of all, I'm going to be showing some common Flutter errors and mistakes that we tend to experience when we are new to the framework, and even I must admit that it happened to me being more an advanced developer. It's like, oh crap, I forgot this. So you constantly deal with this build contest thing, and you can have issues with the scaffold not being available in the context, or maybe you're using our provider or block or qubit state management package, and you can also try to get the qubit or the block, and it's not there, but you already provided, right? So it's like, I use the block provider and it's here. It should be on the context that I'm using. So why this happens, and we tend to get frustrated. I mean, there might be a lot of errors that we experience with BuildContext on Flutter, so this is just a few. But the idea here is to really get a sense of how it works, so you can have a better logic or understanding of it to use it when you're coding. So let me introduce myself. I'm Bettina Carrizo, or you can call me Bets, which is easier for you English speakers. I'm a Flutter GDE and also Flutterista. So if you haven't been to the Flutteristas booth, we are there to make a better environment for every woman and non-binary learning Flutter. So you're welcome to attend and to join us. I'm a software engineer from Uruguay, and I'm a Woman TechMaker ambassador as well. And I currently work in a cybersecurity field as a technical account manager, helping our clients get onboarded and to help them to know the vulnerabilities they are having on their code base by using platforms and allowing them to get access to those. And I will now show you something really personal, because it happened to me that I say, okay, I'm from Uruguay, and not many people know where is it. Could you please give me a hands up if you know where Uruguay is? Okay, awesome. No, so. So I have several folks here from Uruguay and from the same department, so we're a tiny country. It's like we all came here, and we're I don't know if the most people from the same city. It's like us from Uruguay. We're eight people from Uruguay. So this is just to get a sense of it, just a tiny quick, but we're way to the south between Argentina and Brazil. And we drove at least in plane 13 hours it says, but more 20 hours of whole flight to get here. And we're pretty much surrounded by water, so you get Atlantic Ocean all around. Oh, mostly on the side, on the East Coast. So just for you to know where we're from. And so let's get into context. So this is the agenda for today. We'll be not so rigid about it, but you'll get to know what is a widget, what are the trees that Flutter handles for that, and what's the build context. And we'll also talk about inherited widgets and best practices on build context. So if you have any questions, you can reserve it till the end. If we have time, we'll cover it during the session. Otherwise, you can reach me out later, and I will post my also social handlings at the end. And you'll have the presentation as well at the end in a QR code. So everything will be at the end. So this is a very simplistic app. You don't have to get to know about it, but I built it last year for this talk I gave in Spanish. And so we always work with widgets, and for us, everything looks like a widget, right? I mean, we just type widgets, everything is fun, and we're having fun with Flutter because it's easy to understand. But who does know what is actually a widget? Have you thought about it? We tend to feel because in Flutter everything's a widget, so widgets are the magic of everything, so they do all the things. from just allowing us to make the implementation of it, just to set parameters and make like the old configuration we want, to the looking at the device we're building. So let's define some couple of things at first. A widget is actually a declaration of properties that the UI must have. Okay, so it's not actually a thing that you see, it's the configuration of the thing you will be looking at. So that's why they are cheap. So that's why we can render and delete and like dispose and re-render again and change this widget to another one so easily, because the framework allows us to do that. And they are immutable. So if we don't want that widget anymore and we want to change the color of a box, we just dispose that widget and we create another box with the color we want. So we know they're composed by other smaller widgets, and luckily they have a unique purpose. And every widget receives a build context on it. So it receives a context. So let's figure out what the context is. So quiz time. Quiz time. How many of you know what? How many trees does Flutter use to render the UI? So we have 3, 4, 3. Okay. So some of you got the answer. Then you can come and you can take your UI and dessert I have for you. So it's actually 3, and we're gonna cover in here, and we're gonna do it like these are the 3 ones we have. So we have the widget, it's the most common tree, and then we have element and render object. And I want to show you like quite of an analogy I found to explain what they do and what they are needed. Okay. So I don't know if any one of you knows him, but he's an Argentinian muralist. It's called Martin, okay? So he paints these big, huge buildings with realistic paintings, okay? I really like him because of what, like, he ends up doing. And I would love to be walking on the street and seeing a painting, but I just saw it on Instagram all the time. But he brought something really interesting by explaining how do he paints how does he do paint those murals? So I'm bringing that here because what we see here is what we are gonna call the widget tree. So these are for us widgets or representations of what we would like to see, and the colors, the shapes, where it should be placed inside which other widget, and so on. So that's what widgets are for, and this is the representation of them that holds details of what we're going to see. So they're cheap to create, to delete, and they're immutable, as we talked about, and they are easy to understand for libs. So if anyone goes to the street and looks at this, it's really easy to understand, to see. It's like, okay, it's this. And of course, they can componentize to each other. We have many methods within the widget class. The most common is the build one. That is the one we always have to override and use to componentize our widgets. But then we have the mastery mind, like that turns that into actual UI or the painting itself. This is Martin, and he will be our render object tree or a render object itself. So the idea is that so render object has the logic on how to paint, position, and do hit testing. Like for instance, understand where the user is tapping on the screen to make the gesture or the on-tap function, trigger the on-tap function of what it holds. So it is the really mastermind of all the painting we do, all the renderization we do. It's really expensive, so we don't have another Martin run in here. So he has the whole logic. And it's mutable, so he can change things. He can evolve in time, and he's the same person. And I mean, in terms of development, we rather use render objects. We use it for custom things, but like really complex ones. We don't really have to use it to build a whole app, but there are some cases where we might need it. And the most common methods of render objects are just create render object and update render object because they are mutable. And they all receive build context. So up till now, like we've seen it, but we don't know what they are. So how we get from the mind to the painting? So how we get like from like the renderization of things to what we see. So that's where elements come from, okay? And Martin does something really interesting to get to know what he should paint in the building, like in that part of the building, to get the outcome. If you take a look at the picture in the middle, like that is the same exact lady that you see there. So you may see some drawings. So those doodles are what Martin uses to paint things, because they make them easy to figure out, okay, this should go here because this is the doodle I'm pointing to. Okay, so elements in Flutter are the glue, okay, are the secret sauce that connects the mind, the render objects, and the widget, what we see at the end, the result of the application. So they unify, and they turn a widget instance or a configuration and positions in it the tree, and handles how the widget should update, okay? They are mutable as well. They are quite expensive, so there's a lot of logic behind on how to update and re-render stuff on the screen. And there are a lot of methods, but we can get the widget and we can get the render object. So the element really is in the middle of those two, and it knows the widget, the configuration, and the render object it has to return. So the render object ends up painting the things on the screen. So this was an analogy, but the thing to notice is that we have 3 trees, and each of those has nodes that they communicate to each other. So the trees are the same size. So for each widget, we have an element that connects it to the render object that will paint the things on the screen. So this is just to sum up, but I have already talked enough about it, so let's move forward to what is the build context then. So what I did was investigate on the framework, investigate on the framework, like, okay, you can navigate the Flutter code as easy as if it was yours. So I started with a basic example. This is the counter app, like from Flutter. And it's really simple. I hidden some of the implementation, but the idea here is that I'm starting with the complex example. So understanding how stateful widgets are working with this and how they get the build context and what the build context is. And then we'll move forward to the easiest one, which is the stateless widget. So with here, we know we have to create a state for a stateful widget. And then we have the build method, that is the famous one. Okay, and we receive the build context. So what happens if we get inside the stateful widget implementation? So we always extend this. We are forced to override some methods and to make the implementation of it. So why is that? So there is an event here, I'm sorry. So the stateful widget is really simple. So it has a method to create an element. Okay, I'm going to move forward to here. To create an element, and it has another one to create the state. Okay, and the method to create an element says that it manages the widget location in the tree. So if you notice, like we are inside the stateful widget class, so we are inside a widget, okay? And when we call the stateful element to create the element for that widget, we're passing the widget, okay? So that's what I told you, like the elements have the widget inside. So if we get inside the stateful element, we see that we have one method that it's build. So the element has a build method within, and if you check what it does, if you check the documentation of it, it says that the stateful element is an element that uses a stateful widget at its configuration. So that's like the first realization of, okay, the widget is a configuration itself. It's not something that really manages itself or handles a state, okay? But then, when we start to checking the implementation of things, I mean, we never treat with the elements itself, but they have methods within that they call automatically, and they are implemented like this build method. So if you see the build method, it's actually calling a state.build. Like it passes this. What does this mean? The state is actually the state that the widget returns. So this is the state. So widget.createState is where we render the exact widget. So we have a state for that widget, the stateful widget. And then we pass the element to it. So yeah, this is the create state. And if we go back to the implementation, so this is the widget, the state.build this is the, sorry, I had all the way. The state.build this is the my homepage state.build of the stateful element we have on the other class. So what does it tell us? Maybe you're kind of dizzy right now. But basically, when we call this build method here, like when Flutter calls it, because it's automatically triggered, this build context is actually the element of that widget, okay? And I'm going to be a bit faster here, because this is a stateless implementation, okay? So it's similar to the other one, but it's easier to understand. So I hope by now you get all the path. So we're going to the stateless widget class to check the implementation. And it also has a creating element, and it also has a build. And if we go to the stateless element, it creates. This one is easier to understand, because the build method says, I have a widget, and I'm going to trigger the build method of this widget, and I'm going to pass myself, so the element, as the parameter. So this is the same thing. I'm calling, so from within the element, you build the widget, and you pass the element to the widget. But why, when we are in the build method, we see a build context, okay? Why don't we handle elements directly? So this is because the element class is so huge, and it has a lot of implementations that we don't really want to use, that the Flutter team made it simpler. So they made the build context so we can discourage handling elements directly from like day to day. Because who doesn't use, I mean, context on like when building applications? So this is the build context class. It says, like, it directly says, if you read the documentation of the Flutter framework, you may realize many things that you didn't know. So I really encourage that. But these are many methods, so you get the size of the widget, you can get if it's mounted or not, you can get the widget, you can get the render object, so you can get everything. But you can also use those methods to depend on an inherited widget, or to find an ancestor widget of an exact type. For instance, you can look up things in the tree by using the context. So what we know up to now is that the build context allows for the widget to know where it's located in the tree, so the render object can know how to render it, and what I can access and what I can't access. And of course, as well, how to be updated. So there's one important thing about the build context, that it has a scope, okay? And this is kind of tricky to explain, but if I have a widget and it has children, so the immediate parent of my children is the context that I will provide to them, okay? And this is in a componentation kind of way. So we need the build context to have a new context that will be the parent of the child. So this is to explain how does the scope of build context work. And it might be harder to understand, but I will try to explain it really quick. Sorry for this. So every widget, okay, that I render has, so it has injected the build context that my father provided me, okay? So the scope of the build context goes to the leaves of the tree, in a sense that this material app here, if I have it separated and the widget within it's just independent, it will provide a new context to all the children that I have below. So this like pink thing here is actually the context of my material app being provided to the bottom, so to the leaves that I have. And this is all the same. So this is to have, to be careful, because when you provide things, you may not be getting them down if you don't provide a new context from them. And I'm going to show you an example right now. So it's quite tricky, but the build context of the widget of the build method, and you can read it many times after the talk, is not the same as the build context of the widget that is returned by the build method, okay? If I'm a build method, the context I get from the build method, so from the parameter, won't be the same as the one that I'm returning when I return widgets. So if I componentize things, the widgets that I'm calling or that componentize me will receive a different context, okay? So I want to show you an example about how to fix an issue with context, okay? This is a common one, like for maybe beginners, but there is one error that says there is no scaffold message widget found, okay, in your page, so you cannot trigger things like, for instance, a snack bar, because the context doesn't find it in the tree. So if you see the implementation, and give me a second, yeah. If you see the implementation, so I have everything in one widget, which is a pretty bad practice. But this is a simple example. So I have a context up here, and I'm then returning a material app with all the scaffold, all the things. So this is a new app, and this is the root of my app. And here, I'm trying to use that same context to show a snack bar, okay? But this context is the same one, the one at the top. Everything that I'm trying to return up to this elevated button is still the same. So the context here and here is the same, and this context doesn't know anything about having a material app on the way, because I didn't return it yet. So I'm still building things. So if I haven't returned anything, my context won't change at this point. And this has two ways to fix it, okay? And you can see it in example codes of Flutter that they use it, like simple implementations. The first one is using a builder. So basically, a builder assists us with that, because what it does is kind of, it wraps whatever is above it, and it returns a new context with that already injected. It's like if we had two different widgets and we passed through a new build method. But it's easier because you just wrap the widgets that need a new context, and they will figure it out and they find whatever they need. So this fixes the previous code. And even if we name them the same way, so because I'm inner in the tree, the context will work. So it will use the nearest context that I have available. And the second one is, of course, to abstract widgets. I mean, that is the best practice. If you need a very fresh context, you should create your own separated widget, independent, and then receives a new context. So basically, this is a counter view, and I just can call the counter view. And of course, from within, I will be able to get a new context, and just everything will be available. So this works when you are providing things, like for state management. If you are providing a class that manages your state, you will need a fresh context to handle with that. And behind all these implementations of fetching things from the tree, and also some other stuff around that I will let you know. Is a hidden hem, which is inherited widgets, which basically we don't deal with them like directly, but we use them much, and I'm going to explain why. Have you ever used theme of context or media query of context or context.read, whatever? Yes? Many agree? Okay. So basically behind the scenes, you are using an inherited widget. Inherited widget is a widget that is not actually for rendering things, but for storing and enable lookup. Because if we didn't have inherited widgets, we will have to pass as parameters all the things through the tree. So if we needed a theme, you should pass the theme on every widget from the root to the bottom leaf that you need the theme. So inherited widget allows you to look these things up using the context and easily retrieve it if you have it. And same happens with media query. And of course, Qubit, or Block, I should say, and provider uses the context and does the same. So they provide their own API for doing that, but behind the scenes, they are calling the inherited widget. So if you ever use off context, you were making a lookup on the tree to get an object that should be there, stored somewhere. Otherwise, you'll get an error. So basically the way it works, and I'm going to go really fast on this, is when you're calling the off context, you're making your own widget depending on the resource or the class you are trying to look up. So the theme, for instance, or the media query class. And so Flutter looks up in the tree and tries to find it. And what it does is it registers, so it subscribes to the changes of that class or of that property, depending on how you declare it. So what you do with this, and this is kind of a warning, you may have performance issues because depending on how you depend on widgets, you may be getting widget rebuilds more often than you want to. Because what Flutter does is, like, if you do, for instance, media query of context.size or media query.sizeOf that I'm going to explain, you will be forcing that widget a rebuild, even if you didn't specify it, every time that property changes. Okay, so that's why the warning. And so I will be bringing this back because some, I guess, couple of years before, a year and a half or so, we were really used to call media query of context and then whatever property. And we were so happy about it. It's like, yeah, I have the size, the theme, I have everything. But what happened? Every time anything changed in the media query, which is a pretty big class if you don't know, you will be getting a rebuild on that widget. So the size, even if the size didn't change, that widget will fully rebuild. And of course, all the widgets down below. So the Flutter team realized that and said, okay, we need something better for this. So they made some kind of instead of calling the property at the end, they made it like a prefix of the property. So they could internally depend only on that property to force the rebuild. So every property the media query has a handle like this one that you can use. So with media query size of context, you are only depending on the change of the size. If the size of the device never changes, your widget never rebuilds. Okay, so this is a safe way to call it, and you should use it not only for this one, but for the rest of the properties. So this is basically called media query aspect, and it's a class that has all the properties that you can depend on, which are more than the ones that I'm showing up. And it's because of that, because media query contains a large number of related properties, and we not usually depend on a lot. So we depend on few properties on each of our widgets. We might depend on the size, we might depend on the text scalar, we might depend on the orientation, but we don't often depend on all of them. So why will we be updating our widgets if any of the other ones change? So this also uses the context, and that's why it's important to know how it works. The rule of scope that we previously saw also works for inherited widgets. So you may have, and I've never seen it, but you may have several themes on your application, okay? It's not only light and dark, but you may enable the user to change it, or you may have, I don't know, a theme here, and because the application opens something else that's different or whatever, like you may have a different theme. Maybe you're doing, I don't know, a DoorDash that changes the theme, or the client can change their theme of the restaurant so that you have many themes for each of the clients. I mean, you can do anything. So the idea here is that if you have a theme at the root and you have a different theme down below, the nearest one, so the one more close to where you are above the tree, is the one you're getting, okay? So if you would like to get the other one, you'll have to do different things. You can, of course. I mean, you can call them differently. But if you just go by theme of context, you will get the nearest one. So check that out and be aware. It all comes to an end. But first of all, I would like to just give latest suggestions on the matter. We should often ask, like when we're building things that depends on the build context, don't be afraid to depend of it. I mean, it's really useful, and I guess like for us Flutter developers, it's not so, we don't like it that much, but I was an Android developer first, and we had to deal with context from the beginning. We know how to use it, and it was like native for us. So don't be afraid to use it. But just ask questions yourself. If you're struggling with something not being injected or something not showing up, and you can reach me out, we can talk about this later. But for instance, sometimes it happens that when you're showing a modal or when you're showing a dialog or something that goes like to the front of the screen that is not actually you're building a widget, but you're triggering a function that shows a widget, you kind of mess with the providers you have in the context. If it happened to you, come reach me out, we can talk about it. But some questions you may want to ask is like, I'm using the proper context on this, or should I be like, you know, making, should I be aware of the context that I'm using? Is this context, does this context have what I need, or I'm not using it properly? And then, do I have to make moves? Do I have to make changes on the code? Do I have dependencies that need to be up there on the tree because more classes need it? Or do I have to move them down because I need to be an independent widget? So if I need to properly separate stuff, it's like, okay, I'm moving out of this widget. I will be my own independent widget. I will handle my stuff, and I will be able to get that context with me. So I hope you get the idea. I mean, it's not easy to explain, but you can reach me out. You can reach me out here, or we can connect. This is a feedback form if you want to, share some thoughts to improve my talks. And the next slide, I will show it in a minute. It has another QR for the slides and also resources. If you want to investigate more about the matter, I have a lot of resources. And currently the Flutter team released some videos that they're really good. I mean, Craig is really good at making videos. So they have a playlist on how Flutter works that you can check it out there. So thank you. I guess we're good. Yes? Do we have space for questions? 5? Okay, if anyone has questions, you can use the mic. Otherwise, feel free to reach me out. And I have some Uruguayan desserts, as I mentioned, so if you want to grab, you can come. Yes, yes, and I would love to invite, thank you, Roman, you're good. I would love to invite everyone that would like to join us. I'm co-organizer of Fluttercon Latam, and we're making the event at the beginning of September in Quito, in Ecuador. And we're welcoming everyone. I mean, it's a Latin American-based event from the community, like by the community, by all the Latin community. But we are also having some English speakers, and I mean, many of us understands English and can communicate, of course. So you're more than welcome to join us. It's flutterconflatam.dev. If you're lost, reach me out. Or Roman, that you may know better. So we welcome you to the event if you want to participate. And there's still early birds available. So they're $100 the ticket. So, and you can have a party with us in Ecuador. So you're welcome. Do you have a question? Let's go. Go. Okay, good. Thank you for joining, and let's reach out later.